Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. So the intro montage of this episode, I began work on the Mark II's new intake tube. So this is a 2 3/4 inch titanium intake tube, or when I'm in the process of building it. And I had to do a little bit of trickery to get this bend tight enough where it clears the power steering pump, but all is well there. And now I can figure out this bend, how I want it to run, and where I want the filter to be located. So with the other bend in place, I kind of want to shoot over diagonally this direction. So the filter sits somewhere in this pocket right here. And I think that will both look cool and be effective for getting semi-fresh air into that piece that way. So I'll have to be a little bit cognizant of this, as down in this area, this hole in the chassis is where the cold side intercooler tube is going to run. So I may not put the filter all the way down in this pocket. Maybe it will live somewhere in here. But in any case, I need to take my second 2 3/4 inch titanium bend, figure out the angle it needs to be cut at, cut it, and keep fitting from there. Well, I'm ready to locate the final section of this intake tube. And I opted to shorten this final straight section up quite a bit, just to leave a good pocket down in this area for the intercooler tubing to make its way through here. And this piece that I have in the air filter is a straight piece, but I'm still going to do my little 3-dot indexing method for one crucial reason. If you see on the bottom side right here, there is a weld seam, and this is just a factory weld seam from when they took a flat section of sheet and rolled it into the tube. Now, sure, I could just plop this down wherever, weld it up, but if I do it like this, then the weld seam is visible, and I don't want that. So this is where it pays dividends to do your due diligence and take the extra couple of seconds that it takes to index this tube appropriately, to put that weld seam on the bottom side. And if I hold this up, it's just a matter of making 3 little dots. There's 1, 2, 3. And now that factory weld seam will not be visible. This tube will look that much cleaner. And like I said, it takes just an extra couple of seconds to take you from doing just a job to doing a good job. The Mark II's titanium intake tube is completed. And the electroanodizing came out all right. I'm not 100% satisfied with it, but I'm also not dissatisfied with it. It's kind of a cool frosty blue color. And I think I could do this a little bit more effectively if I had a power supply that wasn't as anemic as the one that I have is. I think it's capped right around 1 amp or something along those lines, and that just isn't enough power to do what I'm trying to do with it. But for this job, it did, like I said, it did okay, and this intake tube, I'm plenty happy with it. So now that the intake tube is in place, the next order of business will be to start on the intercooler tubing. And I can take that whole pile of aluminum tubing over there and turn it into a completed induction system for the Mark II. Next up for the Mark II is the intercooler tubing. And I'm going to go ahead and get a jump start on that right now. And I believe I'm going to start with the hot side tube, as it will be the less complicated but the longer of the two intercooler tubes. So we'll be coming from the compressor outlet down around, snaking this way into the inlet of the intercooler over on this side. So the hot side tube will be 2-inch and the cold side tube will be 2.5-inch. And this matches up to the outlet of the compressor and pretty closely matches up to the throttle body, although the throttle body is 2 3/4-inch, but we're not going to have any issues being 1/4 inch undersized on the cold side of the system. So now that the hot side tube for the Mark II is completed, it's time to move on to the cold side tube, in the cold side tubing system, I guess. So from here, at least in the engine bay, out of the throttle body right here, the tube will come on the top of the engine, kind of snake around, shoot this gap right here, and make its way down through this hole. So this is not the ideal routing for intercooler tubing, obviously, as it would be nicer and would be more consolidated if the tube just came through here. But I don't want to mess around with building a new intake manifold, cutting more holes in the car, so on and so forth. So we're going to do it kind of the old school M-Series Toyota way, and everything will still work perfectly fine, and it will be just perfectly effective. So without further ado, let's go ahead, start cutting some aluminum fitting tubes in place, and see how far we can get today. With the top tube section of the cold side intercooler tube completed, I wanted to go ahead and get the couple of features that will be installed on it knocked out, so that way the top section is completely finished and I can focus all of my efforts on the lower section of this tube next. So what do we need to put in place? Well, we need a 3/8 NPT female bung for the intake air temperature sensor. And we also need this flange, which I've gone ahead and coped and everything already, to house our blow-off valve. So this blow-off valve, this is another part similar to the turbo, where it's kind of a legacy part and one that has a lot of sentimental value to me. So this is an old Greddy type RS blow-off valve that I remember when I got this turbo kit initially, and it came with this Greddy valve. I was so excited to finally have a legitimate actual blow-off valve, and not to mention the Greddy name, which has a long history and long pedigree as one of the premier Japanese parts manufacturers. They're right up there with HKS, with Blitz, with pretty much any of the JDM aftermarket parts manufacturers that you think of when you think of old, or I guess the beginnings of performance Japanese imports. So I've gone ahead and cleaned this blow-off valve up, and I replaced all the fasteners with blue titanium fasteners to kind of match the new outlet funnel that I have for it. So this will look really cool in the engine bay, but we need to figure out exactly where it is going to sit. So this is an authentic Greddy flange. Like I said, I've already gone ahead and coped it and everything, so it fits appropriately onto this 2.5-inch tubing. So let me figure out where it will be located, and we can weld everything together, get this tube knocked out, and move on to the lower section. The top section of the Mark II's cold side intercooler tube is now 100% completed. So with the blow-off valve in place, and back here, the IAT bung, right there as you guys can see. I put that there since the harness will kind of run along the back side of the engine, and that will make a nice, simple little tail off of the harness to make its way over to that sensor. So now that this section is all squared away, we need to make our way down underneath of the car and snake our way through over to the inlet. So from the bottom side, we have our tube passing through the chassis, and it will also have to pass through this hole in the chassis as well and make its way over here. So I've decided to alter my angle of attack for the rest of the Mark II's cold side intercooler tube. So initially I was working from the top down, and I realized that I'd be better served if I worked from the bottom up. And the reason for that is due to the angle of the tube going through that chassis hole right there. So I needed to get another piece of tubing, which is this Vibrant ultra tight radius 2.5 inch 90-degree bend. You can see I already have some lines scribed on it. But working from the underside upwards, that gives me the ability to make this section of the tube vertical and then tailor the top angle to suit. So I have my first bend right here, roughly in position, and from there, if I take a section of bend, something like that, I just have to figure out where on this bend to cut it so it will be straight. Then I can cut my short radius bend down and start figuring out what length of straight I need, if I need to do any cheater grinds, anything like that. But moreover, we are in good shape now, and I think this will be a better way to knock this tube out than what I was planning to do before. just like that, the Mark II's cold side intercooler tubing, and frankly, all of the intercooler tubing at this point in time is completed. So, this tube right here was a little bit tricky to get knocked out just because I didn't want any welds to be there, so the leg lengths on it needed to be very precise, but I got everything dialed in. So, again, from the throttle body, we have a little bit of an angle to another bend, straight to, or I guess, a little bit of a bend with a leg on it. We have the blow-off valve with its fancy new blue fasteners. We come up here to a coupler, so that way I'm not trying to fight this whole strange architecture into the engine bay and through the chassis hole. This tube goes down through the chassis hole right there. On the bottom side, it comes into our tight radius bend through the lower chassis hole, and then bends up going into the cold side coupler. And at this point in time, although I did misorder, I'm short one coupler and a couple of clamps. Those are on the way. They will be here shortly. But that aside, the intercooler tubing for this car is completed. From the front side of the car, and if we look at it, I guess I'm kind of level with the front, or the wide front air dam in the front bumper. You can't really see the intercooler tubing, but the hot side tube is visible if you dip your head down. So I'll need to figure out some sort of a front lip or something like that for this, just to hide that portion of the intercooler tubing, as there's plenty of ground clearance, but I'd rather not be able to see, or not have people not be able to see intercooler tubing when they look at the front of the car. So I'll figure out something for that. It shouldn't be that difficult to come up with kind of a quick and dirty solution for it. But the tubing is done, ready for powder coat at this point in time. So I'll get that knocked out pretty soon, and then we'll have to figure out what the next thing to do on this car is. Well, after knocking the intercooler tubing out on the Mark II, I think that is a good place to leave off for this video. So a final look in this episode of what we accomplished. Went from no intercooler tubing, no intake tube, to a full hot and cold side intercooler tube setup, a refreshed OG Gretty blow-off valve, an electro-anodized titanium intercooler, or titanium intake tube rather, and an engine bay that looks very much more completed at this point in time. So at this point, I think, at least from what I can discern by just doing a quick mental inventory, I'm pretty sure that we are very close, if not completed, with all of the major fabrication work on this car. So we have intercooler tubes, we have a tube turbo header, a full titanium turbo back exhaust, a radiator, an intercooler, and that is pretty much it as far as the main components of a turbo system are concerned. So I'll still need to figure out something for the catch can, for the coolant overflow, for kind of little odds and ends like that. But at least at this point in time, like I said, all the big items are checked off of the list, and man, does that feel good. So with all that being said, let's go ahead and wrap this one up. So thank you guys, as always, for coming along on all these different journeys and adventures with me. I am having an absolute blast putting the Mark II back together and bringing it back to life, and I hope that you guys have enjoyed coming along for that entire process with me. We still have these two cars as well that will be getting love in the very near future. I actually just took the Lexus down the road, and it does have an oil leak, which I'm pretty sure is one of the valve covers. I'll get that squared away, probably off camera, or maybe it'll be a short segment in an upcoming video, as that isn't really anything that exciting. But we have a ton of fab work to knock out on that car. Pretty much a whole new turbo system, and I can't wait to bring you guys along for that process as well. And it's going to be really cool when everything is said and done. The Mark IV, just a couple of wires away from being ready to go make a hit with it, and I'm really looking forward to that and can't wait to get back to the track after all of this time. But all of my rambling aside, that will be about the end of this one. So as always, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, check out the website for manifolds, for merch, for all things good that way. And I will see you all in the next episode.